South Africa, the Rainbow Nation, a land of stunning beauty, diverse cultures, and a history as complex as it is captivating. But beneath the surface of this vibrant nation lies a dark shadow, a period of deep-rooted discrimination and injustice known as apartheid. To truly understand South Africa, we must confront this painful past. We must learn from its mistakes and celebrate the resilience of its people. For it is only by acknowledging the darkness that we can fully appreciate the light. Apartheid, an Afrikaans word meaning separateness, was more than just a policy. It was a brutal system of racial segregation and discrimination. It was a system that touched every aspect of life, from education and employment to housing and basic human rights. For decades, it cast a long shadow over South Africa, leaving an indelible mark on its people and its soul. The roots of apartheid run deep, stretching back centuries to the arrival of European colonists in South Africa. This marked the beginning of a long and tumultuous history that would shape the nation's future in profound ways. In 1652, the Dutch East India Company established a trading post at the Cape of Good Hope, marking the beginning of European settlement in the region. This trading post was not just a commercial venture, but also a strategic foothold for European powers in Africa. As more Europeans arrived, mainly from the Netherlands and Britain, competition for land and resources with the indigenous African population intensified. The settlers sought to expand their territories, often at the expense of the local communities who had lived there for generations. This competition, fueled by racial prejudice and economic interests, led to the gradual dispossession of land from the indigenous people. The European settlers, driven by a sense of superiority and entitlement, systematically took over fertile lands, pushing the indigenous populations into less desirable areas. They were pushed to the margins of society, denied basic rights, and subjected to discriminatory laws and practices. These early forms of segregation laid the foundation for the institutionalized racism that would later become apartheid. The discovery of diamonds and gold in the late 19th century further exacerbated racial tensions, as Europeans sought to control the lucrative mining industry. The wealth generated from these resources was funneled into the hands of the European settlers, further widening the economic gap between them and the indigenous people. These historical injustices laid the groundwork for the formal system of apartheid that would emerge in 1948. The policies and practices of segregation that had been in place for centuries were now codified into law, creating a rigid system of racial classification and separation. The segregationist policies implemented by successive colonial governments created a society deeply divided along racial lines. Communities were split, with non-white South Africans being forced into designated areas, often with substandard living conditions. This division was further entrenched by laws and regulations that restricted the movement, rights, and opportunities of non-white South Africans. These laws were designed to maintain the dominance of the white minority, ensuring that they remained in control of the country's political and economic systems. The stage was set for apartheid. The systemic inequalities and racial divisions that had been established over centuries were now formalized into a brutal and oppressive regime. The seeds of racial division sown during centuries of colonialism had taken root. These divisions were not just social, but were deeply embedded in the economic and political structures of the country. The arrival of the National Party in 1948 would mark a turning point in South African history, ushering in an era of legislated racial segregation and discrimination that would last for decades. The apartheid regime would go on to implement a series of draconian laws that would affect every aspect of life for non-white South Africans, from where they could live and work to whom they could marry. The National Party, fueled by its ideology of white supremacy, wasted no time in formalizing segregation into law. This was not merely a political maneuver, but a calculated strategy to entrench racial divisions and ensure the dominance of the white minority over the black majority. The year 1948 saw the beginning of a legislative onslaught designed to cement the separation of races. The National Party, upon coming to power, immediately set about creating a legal framework that would institutionalize racial discrimination and segregation. These laws were not abstract pronouncements. They were tools used to engineer every aspect of South African life. From the moment of birth to the end of life, every interaction, every opportunity, and every right was dictated by these draconian laws. One of the most foundational and insidious laws was the Population Registration Act of 1950. This act was the cornerstone of apartheid, requiring every South African to be classified into one of several racial categories. This act classified every South African by race, creating rigid categories that determined where people could live, work, and even love. The classification process was often arbitrary and cruel, splitting families and communities based on superficial assessments of race. The Group Areas Act of 1950 followed, enabling the government to designate specific areas for different racial groups, leading to the forced removals of millions of non-white South Africans from their homes. Entire communities were uprooted, and people were relocated to areas with fewer resources and opportunities. The Bantu Education Act of 1953 aimed to relegate black South Africans to a life of servitude by providing them with inferior education, designed to limit their opportunities for advancement. This act ensured that black children received a substandard education, preparing them only for menial jobs and perpetuating the cycle of poverty and oppression. The Prohibition of Mixed Marriages Act of 1949 and the Immorality Amendment Act of 1957 further tightened the grip of apartheid by making it illegal for people of different races to marry or have intimate relationships. These laws invaded the most personal aspects of people's lives, criminalizing love and intimacy across racial lines. These laws, along with countless others, formed the architecture of apartheid, a system designed to ensure white minority rule and the subjugation of the black majority. The legal framework was meticulously crafted to maintain control and suppress any resistance. They were enforced with brutal efficiency, policed through intimidation, violence, and imprisonment. The state used its power to crush dissent, employing a vast network of police and informants to monitor and control the population. The impact of these laws was devastating, tearing apart families, communities, and the very fabric of South African society. The legacy of apartheid's legal system is still felt today, as the country continues to grapple with the deep-seated inequalities and divisions it created. The imposition of apartheid did not go unchallenged. From the very beginning, people from all walks of life rose to resist the system. Black South Africans, stripped of their rights and dignity, refused to accept their fate passively. They were determined to fight for their freedom and equality, no matter the cost. The spirit of defiance was palpable, and it spread like wildfire across the nation. They organized, mobilized, and fought back, demonstrating extraordinary courage in the face of overwhelming odds. The African National Congress, formed in 1912, emerged as a leading force in the fight against apartheid. The ANC was not just a political organization, it was a symbol of hope and resilience for millions of oppressed South Africans. Its leaders, including figures like Nelson Mandela and Oliver Tambo, became icons of the struggle, inspiring countless others to join the cause. Through peaceful protests, demonstrations, and civil disobedience, the ANC sought to expose the injustice of the system and demand equal rights for all South Africans. The Defiance Campaign of 1952, where thousands of people deliberately violated apartheid laws, marked a turning point in the resistance movement. This campaign was a bold statement against the oppressive regime, showing that the people would not be silenced. It was a time of great unity and solidarity, as individuals from different backgrounds came together to fight for a common cause. However, the government's response to dissent was swift and brutal. The Sharpeville massacre of 1960, where police opened fire on a peaceful protest, killing 69 unarmed people, shocked the world and exposed the true nature of the apartheid regime. This tragic event was a stark reminder of the lengths to which the government would go to maintain its grip on power. The international community was horrified, and the massacre drew widespread condemnation, putting the apartheid regime under intense scrutiny. This event, etched in the annals of history as a symbol of state brutality, marked a turning point, pushing many towards armed resistance. In the wake of Sharpeville, the ANC and other liberation movements facing increasing repression were forced underground. The struggle took on a new dimension, as activists realized that peaceful protests alone might not be enough to dismantle the oppressive system. The resolve to fight back grew stronger, and the movement began to adapt to the changing circumstances. They formed armed wings, such as Umkhonto we Sizwe, the armed wing of the ANC, to challenge the apartheid state through sabotage and guerrilla warfare. The struggle against apartheid had entered a new and more volatile phase. This shift in strategy was a testament to the unwavering determination of the resistance movement. Despite the increased risks and dangers, the fighters remained committed to their cause, knowing that their efforts were crucial in the fight for freedom. The journey was fraught with challenges, but the spirit of defiance and the dream of a free and equal South Africa kept the flame of resistance burning.